Good afternoon and welcome everybody to this event. My name is Christina Ang and I'm the APAC Head of Learning, D&I and Wellbeing at NatWest Markets. I'm also a member of the Diversity and Inclusion Committee at the BritCham. Today's session is jointly held by the Chamber's D&I Committee and the Healthcare and Life Sciences Committee. We're very delighted to have a very fantastic panel today with a wealth of knowledge to share with us on mental health. Before I introduce the panel, let me share a little about both committees. The goal of the Chamber's Diversity and Inclusion Committee is to provide a forum for members to promote D&I in the workplace, and by raising awareness and sharing best practices around the various challenges and opportunities. Together with the rest of the team in the D&I Committee, we engage, empower, and influence business leaders, employees, and other communities through various events like this throughout the year. On behalf of the Healthcare and Life Sciences Committee, let me share a short overview of their mission. The committee is committed to provide a high-impact cross-industry platform for members by supporting and improving market access for healthcare firms looking to operate in Southeast Asia. They also proactively lead advocacy on key themes and consultations on changing regulations and health reform. Our event today is about mental well-being. We will spend about 40 minutes discussing about mental well-being, and there'll be some time at the end of this session for Q&A. If you have any burning question during the session, please key in the Q&A box. Otherwise, I encourage you to participate in the Q&A session by typing your questions in the box in Zoom. Mental well-being is important for a productive workforce and a healthy workplace. The emergence of COVID-19 has impacted many of us and challenged us in looking at new ways of working. During this event, we hope to share insights from thought leaders about mental well-being and how you can create a supportive workplace for employees to thrive in the current and future state of working. A very warm welcome to our panel today. Good afternoon, Dr. Fong. Dr. Daniel Fong is the Chairman Medical Board of Singapore's Institute of Mental Health since 2011. Dr. Fong is an adjunct associate professor at all three medical schools in Singapore. He's currently the president of the International Association for Child and Adolescent Psychiatry and Allied Professions. He received the National Day Public Service Administration Award in 2017 and the National Medical Excellence Award in 2018 for his work on community and school-based mental health. Dr. Fong is interested in the treatment of emotional and behavioral disorders in children, and he has advocated for the development of child mental health services and strategies through his research. His current interest is in developing age-appropriate, culturally relevant, and locally sensitive resources to promote mental health literacy and reduce stress and suicide in youth and family. Welcome, Dr. Fong. Our next speaker is Ms. Noor YIAN. Ms. Noor is the Executive Director at Singapore Association for Mental Health. Before joining SAMH, YIAN served in the Ministry of Social and Family Development as Director of Adult Protective Service, Rehabilitation and Protection Group. She has 30 years of experience working within the social services sector in Singapore, having led in the review and formulation of the sector's various capacity and capability building schemes. She also spearheaded the specialization of critical services in child protection and residential care for children and youth during her career in MSF. YIAN holds a Master's in Social Work from the National University of Singapore and is a recipient of the Outstanding Social Award in 2003. Welcome, Ms. YIAN. From the private sector, a very warm welcome to Mr. Jeffrey Tan. Mr. Tan is the Group General Counsel and Chief Sustainability Officer of Jardine and CARRIAGE. He's also the CEO of MySet, a registered charity of Jardine Medicine in Singapore. Jeffrey holds an honors law degree from the NUS. He is a senior advocate and solicitor of the Supreme Court of the Republic of Singapore and a solicitor of England and Wales. He also completed the Senior Executive Management Program at Northwestern University, Kellogg Singapore School of Management, and the Driving Strategic Innovation Program for Senior Management by MIT and IMD. Welcome, Jeffrey. A very warm welcome to our last speaker, Ms. Rebecca Kershaw. Rebecca leads responsible business at PwC Singapore. In this role, she is responsible for embedding purpose across the firm, overseeing our environmental sustainability and social impact, including the PwC Singapore Foundation, as well as 3 pillars under human capital: diversity and inclusion, well-being, and culture and values. Rebecca started her career as a chemical engineer and scientific researcher in the UK and Switzerland, working across academia and industry with a focus on material innovation for healthcare application. Alongside her research and teaching, she led IDE efforts, including access to mental health services for young adults, moving into the social impact space. Rebecca has been in Singapore for 3 years, initially leveraging her technical knowledge in sustainability advisory before taking on her current role driving PwC Singapore's well-being strategy. Welcome, Rebecca. Last but not least, our moderator today is Ms. ELENA CHIPALOVA. ELENA has close to 20 years of experience across HR with an emphasis in HR strategy, organizational transformation, diversity and inclusion, employee engagement, well-being, talent and performance. ELENA has lived and worked internationally in Asia, Europe, and the US. She is a frequent speaker at industry events and is a respected authority on organizational issues, including people management, workplace culture, and leadership across the APAC. ELENA has spent most of her career at BP, which she joined in 2004. In her current role, she provided direction on Asia and Pacific D&I strategies and ensures sustainable shift in workplace culture. Under her leadership, BP has received a number of external awards and recognition as employer of choice. Prior to that, she held various HR partnering roles in BP, leading the overall regional talent strategy and ensuring that the culture, practices, policies, and operations align with BP's agendas and values. In 2019, she successfully led the APAC HR function through a modernization and transformation program. ELENA holds a master's degree in human resource management from Edinburgh Napier University, a graduate diploma in human capital management from the Singapore HR Institute, and a master's degree in physics from Moscow Engineering Physics University in Asia. ELENA, a very warm welcome to you. Without further ado, let me hand over to ELENA today. ELENA, over to you.
Thank you very much, Christina. Really nice of you to kickstart this important event, and I'll welcome everyone. Disability is high on the diversity agenda, and it's for many companies. Health is one of the highest causes of disability in the world today, and it causes companies billions of losses each year due to employee absenteeism, lack of productivity and innovation. The World Health Organization estimates that 10% of the global population suffers from some form of mental illness, which means it's 1 of 4 of us is affected. Unfortunately, stigma and taboo surrounding mental health, making it a poorly understood topic across the world, and Asia is not an exception. Fear and traditional beliefs prevail, preventing many that are impacted by mental health issues from reaching out and receiving help that they need. Not seeing the apparent demand and not knowing how best to approach this sensitive subject, unfortunately, few companies today are addressing this critical aspect of employee well-being in their organization. So to get us started and to set up the scene, I would like to ask Professor Fung to share with us the landscape of the mental health sector in Singapore and some of the common mental health conditions, but particularly those that are increased over the recent years. Over to you.
Thank you, Elena. Thank you, Elena. I hope everyone can hear me. My slides are up. Okay, I'm just going to start off, give us some background to what's happening, and perhaps then we could leverage and speak on mental health and mental illness. Now, the impact of this pandemic on mental health, firstly, has caused a lot of concerns because there's expression of the increased prevalence of illnesses and problems associated with economic recession, job loss, even family violence and abusive behaviors in lockdowns where people are kept at home. At the same time, there's concern that people, because of their isolation, may, if they were emotionally unstable, resort to suicides. This actually is data that we have in our institute looking at patients that we take care for. At this point, I don't think suicides are on the rise, but certainly we are monitoring the numbers, and that's of concern. At the same time, the very providers of healthcare that are looking after our population are under a tremendous amount of stress because this is a new virus. We do not know how it works and what are the implications on life in general. And there are risks and fears that people have. So in fact, in the study between Singapore and India, we compared the groups. Interestingly, in India, depression and anxiety is slightly higher than in Singapore, where post-traumatic stress disorder was significant. And I know it's a busy slide, just take my word for it. It's quite significant, and it's of concern, certainly for us, because workers, if they're not able to manage themselves and suffering from some degree of stress, would not be able to function. And truly, in this study, they actually showed that there's a higher complaints of things like headaches, throat pain, apart from the usual emotional aspects of insomnia, tiredness, and lethargy, and even anxiety. Alongside this, of course, is what's happening in the world. I had a quick scan of the literature. This is a couple of studies. One is in China, where it looked at people returning to work. Well, 10.8% of respondents suffered from PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder after returning to work. But returning to work did not actually cause an increase in psychiatric symptoms. That means illness itself or mental illness didn't rise. I'll talk to this a little bit later. More executives are practicing hand hygiene and more workers avoided sharing utensils, which is a good thing. Infection control measures were in place. In fact, another study, this one looked at what's the real stress behind all of this. It's actually financial stress. This is the primary mediator for emotional contagion and poor safety outcomes. So these are important points. So what has happened since the pandemic? The old normal. This is what's happening in our hospitals. The number of admissions to hospital has been moderated. The outpatient clinics, the specialists, outpatient clinics, people were not coming forward as much. Emergencies were coming down because there was fear in the air. This was in healthcare. Outside of healthcare, I mean, what our old normal was really meeting up and getting together in meetings and having collaborative face-to-face meetings had to change. In fact, digitalization, working from home, home-based learning for children, and tele-everything. I mean, we're having a webinar now, right? Which we would have been unheard of. We have a meeting in a room with lots of people. It's changed. It's changed the way we provided healthcare. It's changed the way we worked in our offices. And Zoom is very well known. I've used Zoom so many times in the last, I'm kind of over Zoomed actually. And it's not a good thing. So what is the mental health approach we have to take in this context? First, I want to talk a little bit about mental health because it's an area that is quite important and sometimes poorly understood. Now, in the population and providers like myself as doctors and clinicians, we are one end of what I call a pyramid. The other are patients, people who already have mental illnesses. Now, mental health affects the general population. What is mental health? Mental health is not merely the absence of illness. It's actually a very overarching well-being concern. Now, very often we are, we'd like to think that majority of us don't have much stress, but some of us do. And when stress increases, we start to have distress and we start to have problems. These are mental health related issues. On the other hand, mental illness is slightly different. This is a biological problem. It's not a reaction to stress. This very often have genetic and brain related abnormalities, and they have to be treated by professionals. That is about, I think Christina said, or is it Elena who said, 1 in 4. I think in Singapore, the data is about less than 1 in 5, but it depends on where you do the prevalence studies. And of course, in mental illness, there's mild illness and moderate illness and severe illness. Here in the Institute of Mental Health, we deal with mostly the moderate to severe illness. So the percentage is much lower. Now, what this slide actually shows is that you can have mental illness and you can have mental health issues. They are not necessarily on the same dimension, but they're in the same pyramid. And severe mental health problems doesn't necessarily translate into mental illness. The other piece, of course, is you can have a mental illness and be still in good mental health. That means you are happy with your life. Your illness is under control, very much like someone with diabetes or hypertension. You're on treatment, you're fine. So it's important to understand the role of stress in this. This is just a Singapore mental health study looking at figures. So 1 in 7 is a lot lower than the 1 in 4, but that's our local data in Singapore. Now, what can we do? What are the kind of services that are needed? For our patients, people with mental illness, I think now because of infection control measures, we need technology to enable the management. And for in the hospitals, I think trying to manage trauma is important because post-traumatic stress disorder is very much associated with what's going on and everyone's scared and frightened and fearful. And then of course there is the possible mental illnesses that may result from COVID. What we know of COVID-19 is that we think it's a respiratory disorder. Actually, it's an autoimmune, it's an immune response disorder that causes an inflammatory process that can occur in the brain as well. You're not sure. On the mental health side of things, there is need to provide, firstly, some guidance on help and how to seek help. I think some of the other speakers on the panel will speak more on this, but I just broadly say there needs to be both live support, which is synchronous, and asynchronous. Information needs to be available for the public so they know where to get help and what to do when they are in distress. At the same time, in the longer term, I think there is importance to first train mental health professionals and even general health professionals to manage mental illnesses in general and reduce the stigma. For the population at large, psychological first aid and mental health literacy to understand mental health concerns do not necessarily translate to mental illness and what are mental illnesses in the first place, to really manage issues like anxiety and depression. As a whole, in the workplace, most of the issues are not around mental illness, it is around mental health. How do you manage stress? Because now there's a lot of changes in work processes. Working from home, economic recession, job loss, social distancing and isolation is not a good thing. If you don't meet your co-workers, how would you feel as a team? So you need to be able to manage emotions, have coping strategies, social support and social linkages within the workplace. That's important. How can you do that? Can you respect the safety, dignity and rights of individuals, but adapt and consider cultural aspects, particularly in this part of the world, be aware of infection control, how to look after yourself, and when to seek help when it is needed. I went a little fast because I want to complete within the 10 minutes, and I'm kind of done as an introduction to how we can support the workforce. Thank you very much. I'm gonna stop the sharing.
Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you. So what I'm recollecting is that public and organizational education has created an awareness around mental health, and we can indeed go and find lots of information online. And that's good because more understanding will facilitate empathy and open-mindedness. Furthermore, compassionate communication could help those affected by mental health and bring them closer to those that can help. So with that, I'm turning to YIAN. A question to you. Are you seeing more people seeking help for mental health conditions, and especially during circuit breaker? How have the NPOs and charities been supporting its clients and beneficiaries, especially during this period? Over to you.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm YIAN from Singapore Association for Mental Health. I'm happy to be with you here today to share a little bit on what we observe on the ground as a social service provider for mental health services. During this whole period of COVID and circuit breaker, we, like many corporates from the social service side, actually do see a lot of happenings in that sense to people and about their everyday daily life and their work life, the experience they go. mental health issues that come up as a result. Singapore Association for Mental Health, actually, we have 10 services. We started operation in 1968, and we have always been focusing on promoting mental wellness for all. And our services range from community engagement, education, raising awareness about mental health issues, to providing creative services to help people to manage their anxiety, promote mental wellness. And more importantly, we also have rehabilitation services where we support people in recovery of mental illness. So just to contextualize some of the things that Daniel had shared, we all know that from the last 2016 survey, 1 in 7 Singaporean here would actually experience a mental health condition in their lifetime. And from a psychosocial perspective, we look at mental health as a continuum. And Daniel has shared that having a mental illness does not necessarily mean that people have poor mental health. And actually, not having a mental illness does not also mean that we have good mental well-being. So when we look at it from a continuum, at different point, we could be experiencing different kind of feelings and emotional well-being. On the green side, on the healthy side, we could be happy, generally very satisfied with life, and meeting our aspiration, and emotionally more balanced. But sometimes when trouble takes place or stresses come in, we could be in the yellow and the amber zone, where we actually our life can be a bit disturbed, and there's more anxiety, and we may not sleep well. I'm sure you can actually, some of you may be able to identify some of the symptoms that come about. And it really depends on our coping strategies, and how can we build our own resilience towards managing ourselves back to the green state. Yeah, and if we move along and we don't take care of ourselves well, and do not know where are the resources to support us, we can go into the red state, where we actually can become sick physically. We can have very disruptive lifestyle. We cannot be functioning very well in our activity of daily living. So that is a time of concern. In this whole continuum, there are scales for us to actually look at where we are. And oftentimes, from our social service experience, we don't have medical treatment, so we do a lot of psychosocial intervention to support people. So these are some of the ways we help people understand that we need to take care of our mental well-being, right? During this whole period, before we actually went into circuit breaker, we are already in DORSCON Orange in late February, and all the social service agencies, in fact, have to come up with our business continuity plan. And we were already planning to go into split team. And in fact, for Singapore Association for Mental Health, we started going on trial split team just before circuit breaker kicks in on 7th of April. And what happened was, although we have plans, we have preparation, we had a lot of meetings, discussion, and preparation with staff. Actually, we were quite affected by this circuit breaker, the first phase, because the instruction is all services have to close, except for very, very frontline services like residential homes. So out of our 10 services, we only have one service that can fully remain open 24/7. That is our group home in Bukit Batok, where we run a residential service for people in recovery. So all the other 9 services, we have to immediately plan how to continually provide our service to our beneficiaries and community through remote means. So it was very challenging for us, because we do not have all the hardware support at those in the initial juncture, and when we acquire the hardware, we do not have all the apps and software, and it took us a while to get the subscription of all this Zoom and Webex up. So, and what happened was the instruction was very clear that due to the protective measure and safe distancing measures, there's no way we could see clients, and we have to actually refer services to other frontline that are allowed to or considered whitelisted agencies that can actually visit cases. So it was very tough. And what happened was subsequently there was a reverse, I would say maybe not a reverse decision, but MOH has taken into consideration the feedback, and there was a new advisory that allow with exemption, some exemption to some services. So we managed to get some exemption, and some of our services are listed as whitelisted agency, and we could provide minimum on-site support to our service recipient. So our counseling services, we could actually let some of our staff with minimum staffing go back to the center, and we are able to see some high-risk cases during those period. Yeah. So during this period, even as we as a service provider try to adapt and change to using virtual means to provide consultations as well as sessions and activities with our service recipients, not all our service users could actually benefit from the remote services. Mainly, we take it for granted that while we are ready, people at the other end should be able to actually enjoy what they usually enjoy during the on-site support. But many of our clients actually do not have the hardware, and they can't afford to do subscription. So we actually also face that challenge with clients who we want to support. And also there are clients and beneficiaries who prefer not to do all this virtual link up with us because their home environment is not suitable, their home condition and home environment is not suitable, and some of them are not used to this kind of arrangements where they felt that their privacy can be compromised, especially if they have to do it in their house and there's not enough space and private space for them to do so. So there is quite a lot of adjustment that we have to do. So we resort a lot to telephonic support and to clients, right? Okay, just a bit on what is seen on the ground, which actually could be mirrored in the survey, national survey that are carried out. One of the market survey company actually showed their survey results, and I think it was published in the press, and that actually a quarter, 1 in 4 respondents actually expressed that their mental health is not so good. And one of our partners, Silver Ribbon, they also carried out a survey of 500 over respondents, and anxiety and mood issues also surfaced as a concern. I think everybody is also aware there's this National Care Hotline that was launched on 10th of April. So shortly after the launch, towards the end of the month, in early May, they have released this report to show that actually within a short span of time, there is 6,600 calls. And out of this 6,600 calls, 40% actually need more support, and these calls are diverted to social service agencies and other community support agencies that provide more dedicated support to people with mental health worries and concerns. SCSS also have a chatbot called Bell, the chat, and they also see an increase during this period, circuit breaker period, of people accessing the web to actually ask questions and seek help. So I think it is also consistent that majorly people raise concern and have said that they are stressed and anxious, and they need emotional support. Just coming back to our own Singapore Association for Mental Health, our own service, our counselling service have a toll-free helpline where our counsellors pick up calls from anybody in the community. During this period between April to June, compared to the same period in 2019, we have a 50% increase in callers. And among the callers, that new callers, we actually see almost 40% callers in the age band of 21 to 40 years old. This is pretty telling about the situation on the ground, in that this would be the group of people who possibly are working adults, and because of having to work from home, because of the movement restriction, they have actually suffered more mental health concerns. And what's surfaced is also about 25% of them actually express they are depressed, they have anxiety and mood issues, very stressed during this period. And also they have also raised issues about relationship. For example, one of the caller actually said that during this period it's very stressful, and she wants to break up with her boyfriend. And also family issues came up. We have callers who call that they having a lot of conflict because of everybody being at home, and there are also those callers who are worried about their family members or friends who are expressing depressive thoughts or suicidal ideation. And there are callers who are caregivers who during this period is very stressed because they are unable to send their children to childcare, nor are they able to send their seniors to daycare centers or day rehab centers.
Leanne, sorry, it's Elena. I need to a little bit cut you.
Right.
Someone asked, is there a phone number that you could share where, where people can call? And probably we need another 20 seconds to close your section.
Sure. All right. I will show some numbers and resources at the last slide. Okay. So I think we are all aware that we all wear many hats, and we are at the same time stressed with having to adapt to the challenges and move towards a more adaptive new normal. So I'm just sharing, I have 2 more slides, just sharing some resources for employees and as well as for employers. TAFED has some guidelines on how we can actually be more mindful of mental health concerns and issues and support employees throughout this period. And there's also a workplace well-being work group comprising national bodies as well as corporates. And Jeffrey Mindset is also one of the company who is a part of this work group. They have come up with an e-guide on managing the organizations and working with employees throughout this period. SMH has also partnered corporate Chancellor, and we come up with a infographic, and we've posted in our social media to share with people how actually this whole period of stress actually is a very good learning experience, and we can turn it to very positive development for our own mental well-being, and we can become more resilient over time. And my last slide is really to show this is not exhaustive, but these are some of the possible places where you can contact, or your employee can contact if they need support. That's all I have. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Leanne. It's really pleasant to hear that many progressive organizations took the chance of COVID, which is an unfortunate chance. Yes, they showed their resilience and showed a really good ways to advocate for those who need help and dispelling of their issues around the topic. And you've mentioned Jeffrey, which brings me amazingly well to our next speaker. Jeffrey, I know that you devote yourself patiently to supporting this big cause, and I know that you have a daytime job and another job working for with a charity Mindset that Jardine set up. Please share with us how you've been supporting the mental health community, and what advices can you give to SMEs?
Great. Can you all hear me? And hopefully you can be able to see my screen as well.
Not yet.
Okay. Now?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay, I'm not sure why it's not coming through, but it's okay. Let me try and see if I can share that once again. There you go. And is that coming through?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for your time and for inviting mindset and myself to this. I think you've heard from Daniel and from YIAN. Maybe just a little bit of background on mindset before I jump to the last couple of slides. So Mindset is the charity that the Jardine Medicine Group has established about 9 years ago. And you're probably wondering why mental health. When we started in 2011, this was a totally uninteresting, underserved area. You would find a lot of charities focus on health, on physical health, on disabilities, on children, on education, but nobody wanted to talk about mental wellness or mental health because it was a very taboo area to be a part of. But not talking about it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And so one of the things that the group has started out over the last 9-10 years is to be able to try and raise awareness about mental health, mental wellness, and to be able to talk about it. For those of you who are not familiar with Mindset, well, these are the constituent businesses of the group in Singapore, and I'm sure some of them would be quite familiar with you, from the Genki Sushis to the Starbucks to the Cold Storage, Hong Kong Land and Mandarin Oriental. This is all part of the group that is behind Mindset in the Jardines group itself. We've been recognized for our efforts over the years, and we've been encouraged by this. What's our focus? Our focus really is trying to do good and to be able to recognize that this is a journey. We don't do it alone, obviously. We do it with our partners and co-collaborators. Two of them are with me today, Dr. Daniel Fung, of course, and YIAN from SAMH. And you'll find that there has been a growing awareness and an environment where more people are aware of this and are willing to come alongside and be a part of it. So we don't do this alone. We do this with all our social service agency partners. And if you think about Mindset as an organization, it's actually only made up of 2 full-time employees. Everyone else who is involved in this effort is actually a volunteer or has got a daytime job doing something else, like myself. How do we do this? We do this by way of what we call Jardine Ambassadors. So every year we've got 40 individuals who come alongside, spend 2 years of their life to be a part of this venture and to be able to walk alongside with the activities that they have. What are the activities? Awareness, outreach, getting people back into the workforce. And this is important because part of this inclusiveness is to be able to get and accept people who may be suffering from mental health issues to be accepted within the workplace. And that, I think, just adds to this whole thing about how do we have an inclusive community as a whole, social enterprise and fundraising. Again, this chart shows, apart from the numbers that have been contributed to our effort, are the other partners, from Digital Mindset to Singapore Association of Mental Health, Institute of Mental Health. I just wanted to highlight 2 particular flagship projects that we have launched in the last 9 years. The first is with the Singapore Association of Mental Health called Mindset Learning Hub, and it's about raising the importance of the workplace environment and how, if you're a mental health person in recovery, how important it is to be in a work environment, because that gives you a sense of attachment, belonging, to be part of a local community, and it adds towards your self-worth in terms of building that environment for persons in recovery. The other one, which we embarked on last year, is kind of interesting. It's with Touch Community Services. And this focuses on pathological gaming, but it also talks about addiction to the internet and all things internet. And it's kind of interesting because if you think about the last couple of months, I, for one, have been totally addicted to the internet. I am walking through that addiction right now and participating on a daily basis, whether it's on a WebEx or a Zoom or some form of video conference that I'm on. And I think this is going to be, in our view, a growing area that we'll have to address as we go back into that new normal of how to be able to regulate between the internet virtual world and the real physical world itself. I think it will be an interesting challenge for us as we make that transition. This is the one chart that I think if you forget about all the other charts that I've talked about, hopefully it will stay with you. And what I would call the 4 A's. As employers, I think it's important for us to be able to set the tone of awareness. If you are an employee, you would not think twice about saying physical safety in the workplace is important, and you need to be able to have a place where your employees come in and will not leave injured because you have got poor processes. But I think the fundamental shift needs to be not just a physical, safe workplace, but also a supportive workplace that accepts and supports good mental health practices and mental wellness. And as Leanne says, there's a group of employers that have come together in the last couple of years called Work Well. There is a e-guide that helps with steps as how you can be able to do this at the workplace. And again, one thing that I like to highlight is that it is not as daunting as it looks to be able to take that first step, because I think today we do have that support structure that's out there. And Work Well is one. The second A that I would like to highlight is what I call acceptance. Because when you talk about mental health issues, oftentimes people tend to light up their eyes when you talk to somebody about mental health challenge that you have, but it's not lighting up to help, it's lighting up to step away, because immediately you have got that stigma that comes around to say, oh, maybe you're not quite that okay. And if you're not quite that okay, maybe I should not be associating with you, or if I leave a label with you, then I look at you in a very different perspective altogether. And I think hopefully over the last couple of months of this COVID pandemic, it's been able to show that none of us are immune from the stresses, and none of us are immune from some of these mental health challenges that we may have, whether it's stress at work for working from home over the last couple of months, or not being able to separate our personal lives from our work lives. Activities. I think it's important as employers in the employment environment to be able to talk about this, to promote this, and to be able to address stress management. I like to particularly highlight self-care here, and I put on there especially for leaders. Why do I say that? Because oftentimes as managers and leaders in the work environment, we tend to take if I could call a superhero persona and say, of course I can manage this, of course I can deal with this. But I think it's also important for us as leaders of the groups that we manage in the workplace to recognize that we have to first take care of ourselves before we can take care of somebody else. And it reminds me that, not that long ago, we used to have this activity called flying on an airplane, if you recall that, before COVID came around. And one of the things that they'll tell you is that, if we have a decompression and the air mask were to fall down, help yourself first as the adult before you can be able to help your children or somebody else. And I think that's a good reminder that we have to take care of our own mental health being as well. And then finally, the last A would be assistance. I think that as not just the social service agencies have recognized, the government has recognized, and so there is formal support mechanisms that's out there that we as in the work environment can be able to point our colleagues and team members to. Leanne has shared some of that. Mine line is one that was just introduced not that long ago by the government. And I think there are certainly tools and help that's available. So from that perspective, I would just encourage everybody to think about the workplace in this perspective and with this mindset of the 4 A's of awareness, of acceptance, of activities, and of assistance. So those are the points that I wanted to highlight, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Jeffrey. Oh, sorry. Thank you, Jeffrey. You can mute yourself. Really very interesting. I didn't realize we have so many things in common, like addiction to internet. And so a small follow-up question for you that came. So for a while, we have been imagining what technologies could do for our future. And today we are bombarded with information, and a new term that we are hearing is digizophrenia. and it's said to be linked very heavily with mental health. Could you comment on probably the biggest influencer of the modern day mental health issues?
I think it's a question of trying to segregate work-life balance, and you know, Daniel and YIAN can be able to talk to that. Technology is supposed to serve us and to be able to give us a lot more time to serve our own personal needs. But I think there's been a conflating and a bleeding of our personal lives and our work life, and the technology that's supposed to help us, I think, is also starting, if I can use that very strong word, starting to hurt us and harm us. And I think the only way that we should respond to it is to respond with a discipline, as it were, in terms of trying to define time that we would have for ourselves, as opposed to things just circle on, I don't have a commute now from the office, from the home to the office, which used to be about 15 minutes, where I could have a downtime, listen to the music, and clear my head, whether it's going to the office or coming back. Now my commute is from my bedroom to my study, which is less than 30 seconds. So how do I replace that to be able to get myself recentered? I think it's important. So yeah, those are some of my thoughts.
Lovely, thank you. And thank you for highlighting the importance of creating environment in an organization that promotes awareness of mental health. And again, that again brings very well to Rebecca. And before I ask you a question, can I just remind everyone to please continue populating Q&As. We will try to address them after Rebecca spoke. And Rebecca, turning to you, so if you could share how your company, PwC, has helped employees to navigate through this unprecedented times. In fact, I think the word unprecedented has been reported by Google as the most searched word for the last half a year.
Thanks, ELENA. Just checking. So can you see my...
Yes, can hear, can see.
Okay, perfect. Just put it on full screen. Okay, great. So I was given the remit of 2 slides, so I've tried to pack it all into 2, but so forgive me. So I think just to understand how companies in general, but PwC specifically, have dealt with what's gone on in the last 6 months, it was useful to look at kind of our well-being journey over the last year or so and where we were pre-COVID. Because that's also, when we look at this, it's important to look at, you know, where we're going to be when we emerge out of this as well. So I think for us, really, first of all, looking at, you know, what is the state of mental health in the workplace in Singapore. The business case is very well established for investing in employee mental health. In Singapore, the NCSS study showed 5.6 times return on investment for investing in employee mental health in the workplace. So, but I think that's something that's not really been internalized necessarily by the business community here as much as it could be. The message that it's not just a nice thing to do, it actually makes business sense. So when we talk about mental health in the workplace, you know, the 2019 study in Singapore showed 92% of the workforce in Singapore are stressed. But more importantly, 12% said that they had an unmanageable level of stress. So there's sort of that risk of burnout, and this 92% is above the OECD average. So in general, the Singapore workforce were more stressed before we came into COVID than the average. So that's kind of the backdrop that you start on. But as we were saying, it's not just, there's kind of the mental health, whether you have distress or a problem, but there's also the clinical side. So with 1 in 7 people experiencing a clinical mental health condition, not just distress, during their lifetime, and actually most studies show it's about 3/4 have an onset by your mid-20s. So that means that by the time you're in the workforce, the likelihood, you know, that a significant number of us are living with either mental health distress or actual full-blown mental illness, it's actually very commonplace in the workforce, and we just don't talk about it. So it's not an other people's problem, it's an everybody's problem. So what does that mean for PwC? Well, so globally we have what's called Be Well, Work Well, which is kind of our framework for well-being in the workplace, which really focuses on 4 aspects of personal well-being. So your physical health, your mental health, and then emotional and spiritual aspects. But we looked about a year ago and said, how do we really localize this and make this relevant in terms of the maturity of you know, in Singapore? And we really wanted to acknowledge that workplace mental health is a 2-way street. So you have your obviously individual mental health affects the business, right? Because it affects engagement, performance, absenteeism, presenteeism, retention, you know, all of those things. But also work is a huge part of our lives, particularly here. I mean, people work extremely long hours, and there's often a huge link between a huge amount of kind of your identity and sense of purpose and sense of yourself that's very linked to work. And so what you do at work doesn't stay at work. It also affects you at home. And so it's a hugely important factor. Your kind of what we call professional well-being is a huge factor in your overall mental health and well-being. So that's why we have them kind of interplay of the two together. So yeah, so we look at it as both as an organization, but also as an individual, you're responsible for your professional and your personal well-being, and they're intrinsically linked. So I think many of you may have heard before the Daniel Pink framework, where he would talk about, you know, autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Well, when we talk about professional well-being, it's sort of similar. We're talking about, you know, your growth journey. So for us, is what you're doing, do you feel that what you're doing is part of a longer career? Does it fit into your goals and aspirations? And that's that kind of sense of purpose in what you're doing? And are you getting kind of progression? Then really the learning and skills. So are you getting skills to get better at what you're doing? Are you really mastering something and feel that you are you know, an expert in a topic? And then the huge part about, you know, the work culture and environment that has a huge effect in terms of belonging. So do you feel heard and valued, but also do you have the tools that sort of enable you to do your work? So all of those aspects really on a pre-COVID, on a normal situation, are all very, have a very big link to your mental health and the employee's responsibility to that. So for us, well-being really, including managing your mental health, it's not just a soft skill and a nice to have. The clear message from us is like, it's a critical business skill to maintain your performance and engagement. So that's also why we're part of the, as mentioned earlier, the Work Well Leaders Work Group. And we hosted last year the first CEO dialogue on mental health to really make sure that, you know, this is a strategic priority that's being dealt with at a C-suite level. So, you know, in terms of the challenges, we already touched on them before. So stigma is a huge issue. So we did the Beyond the Label campaign internally, and we had an internal campaign last year where we had our leaders do a video where they were really saying why mental health is important to them, and role modeling and saying and making a pledge and explaining, like, this is personally what I do to invest in my mental health, which was great. But then we sort of realized that having asked everyone to pledge to talk about mental health, the actual level of mental health literacy was too low to do that. People don't have the basic understanding and language to be able to talk about mental health or mental illness. So since then, we really worked on increasing that mental health literacy through trainings, awareness, and things like that, including doing a training for all of our front end HR staff and some of our leadership. So it was a full day training on mental health, mental illness, and what that means in the workplace, so that they're equipped to be able to actually deal with situations when they come up. But then the other thing I think is around culture. So the type of organization we are, and I think also in Singapore in general, there's really a kind of stress as a badge of honor kind of culture that means that working unsustainably is kind of rewarded, and that's really seen as you know, that's a success. That's a great thing if you're sort of working yourself until you can barely function. So how do we get around that that aspect of it? So, you know, places to start as an organization. So, you know, as I said, we started with a lot of awareness stuff, but then it's really about leadership setting it as a priority. So you'll hear a lot, I hear a lot, you know, I don't have time. I don't have time to invest in my own mental health and well-being. But what that's really saying is I haven't made it a priority, because we all have the same amount of time. It's just that you're allocating your time based on the priorities. And if it's not set as a priority, you're not going to give time to it. So that's one thing where leadership's really important, to set it as a priority. And then role model that. So yeah, as I said, we also did, you know, like full day training for our leadership and our HR sort of frontline staff. But then really you have to support it with policies. So make it official. So we've got, you know, flexible medical leave, we've got, which you can take as sort of mental health days. We've got insurance coverage that covers mental health, and we have our employee assistance program and things like that, but also practical tools. So I was involved, as I said, the wellness guide from the Work Well that YIAN mentioned, but also we have a mental health and managers toolkit and things like that. So, but fundamentally, if you don't embed mental health and well-being into how you recognize performance, it's never going to be a priority. So we've now just launched a revised professional development framework, which builds into our whole leadership portion. We've really built how you manage your own well-being, and how, for more senior grades, how you manage the well-being of your team is actually one of the attributes that's measured in terms of your performance and your and your progression. So that was sort of where it was at pre-COVID, and then obviously COVID-19 happened, and we've already touched. The others have already touched on how this affects individuals and the workplace in different ways. But I think many of you might have seen that meme that came out, which was like, what has advanced the digital transformation agenda in your organization more, your CEO, your chief digital officer, or COVID-19? And the answer is obviously COVID-19, as we all went digital. But I think that also stands for mental health, because having been it's really pushing the agenda to talk about mental health in the workplace. For a long time, suddenly there is a conversation that's happening kind of naturally. Sort of opened up Pandora's box, really, and even small things like on calls, ending calls with people, and they'll say, stay safe, stay sane. And, for all that, it's trite, but it does mean that people are really acknowledging that there are physical impacts, but also mental and emotional impacts of what's going on right now, and that that's something that's coming into the workplace. Sorry, there's an alarm going off.
And Rebecca, that fits really well with your timing, and I need to we're coming close to kind of an hour. So do you want to close in with the next sort of a 20 seconds sort of on the key message? And I think there's a question from Cara, and I think you're answering just nicely. And if you could help me to round up your slide.
Sure. Sorry, what was the question?
I will read the question. I think you did answer that, but I love the term step in, not step away. But a lot of managers don't know how to step in and know what to say when an employee opens up. Do you have any practical tips on how best to respond?
So actually that's something so I was going to get to. So there's obviously the individual part of this in terms of, resilience and all this stuff, but really the critical part is getting managers and leaders. It's that middle part, because if you don't bridge what you're doing as an organization through managers to the actual people, there's a real gap there. So that's one thing that we have had a lot of questions on. So we were already working on it, but essentially now, instead of me going to people, they come to me to ask. So we've had some sessions on how to approach these conversations, where with someone who is showing signs of distress, or who's actually come to you to disclose that they're really struggling or have a mental or facing mental illness, as a coach or a manager. So the key message there is really on listening to understand, not listening to reply or to give advice, and that, empathy is really key. And also acknowledging, we're equipping managers to have a conversation where they're listening with empathy, and then can refer people to the right sources of help. You're not expecting don't expect your managers, or don't expect an individual to be able to counsel someone. You're not, beware, you're not a psychologist, you're not a counselor, you're not a trained doctor. But what you can do is make sure that it's around that psychological safety aspect, that they really feel comfortable to voice their concerns and feel that you're listening to them and want to get to a better outcome. And then you can, on their behalf, find where to go next. But really, the key there is really just listening to understand.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. I really appreciate. And I know we're running out of time. I wanted to address one of the questions, and I know, Jeffrey, you wanted to answer it. We have a question from Yvonne that would like to know how one can participate in the Mindset Jardine Ambassador program.
Thank you very much. The program right now is within the group itself, and we've been talking amongst the ExCom as to how we can be able to extend that outside of the group. But I think I've sent a response to whoever was asking that question. I think it was Nora, with my email. Please feel free to reach out, and then I think we can continue that conversation as to how we could get you involved.
Thank you, Jeffrey. There is one more question before I pass to Andrew, and this question also from Yvonne. And if possible, Dr. Fung, would you like to take this question? I'm thankful for the panelists sharing. While what is the percentage of the employers in Singapore that really care or aware of the importance of the mental health at workplace, where most company HR hardly mention about it, from my understanding?
That's a difficult question. I'm not aware of how companies look at this. But my own point is, I think it's important to have not just engaged employees and workers in the companies, but employees and workers who feel that they are doing something that they enjoy. You know, it's almost like in healthcare, we started this movement called Joy in Work. And the reason was that in at least in healthcare organizations, there was an overemphasis on getting things done and not remembering the people, the providers of the service that needed support for themselves. So I think trying to find joy in work is probably quite critical for overall well-being, and that's something that I hope that every employer would think about.
Thank you. Well, that concludes our event, and I really would like to thank all the presenters, and we could hear all the passion in the room. And before we close off, if I may go to Andrew to close off the event. Andrew chairs the D&I committee of British Chamber.
ELENA, thank you, and thank you to all the panelists. I thought that was a fantastic and really fascinating discussion. So thank you to all for taking the time to talk to our members about this very important topic. For me, some of the takeaways I took from the discussion, I think the difference between mental health and mental illness is very interesting and very important for us all to be aware of. I think we've all got a role as business operators in the Singapore community. We all have a role in protecting our employees, in really looking after our employees. But it's also interesting that the healthcare industry is highly involved, and charities are also very involved. And there's clearly some very good resources out there that we can use to really support our employees during this period. And also, I thought it was fascinating to hear some of the best practice initiatives that the companies operating here in Singapore are following and doing to support their employees. Mental health was an area that has been highlighted by our members as an area people would like more help in addressing and raising awareness. So I think hearing from companies on practical tips how to support your employees during this time is really important. So thank you both to Jardine and PwC for really giving us that overview of what you're doing. This is an area that the Diversity and Inclusion Committee are very focused on. It is an area that has got a lot of interest from our members, and we feel is important to carry on this journey, really to improve the understanding and the awareness of this issue going forward. So you will see more initiatives from the D&I committee going forward. But on that note, I'd like to say a huge thank you. Thank you first to all our expert panelists. It really came across that you are experts in your field, and very good tangible advice that you gave to our members. So thank you to our panelists. ELENA, you're one of the members of BritCham. You support us a lot in a lot of our D&I events. So thank you as well for managing this discussion so well, and really helping us to deliver a great webinar today. So thank you, ELENA, for moderating. And then behind the scenes, the Diversity and Inclusion Committee, Christina and Joey from the committee have both worked really hard to put this event on with the BritCham team. So thank you to all the team who organised this event and put this on. I think it's a really useful topic to discuss with our members. Just looking forward, we do have a number of events in BritCham over the next couple of weeks that we wanted to highlight. There's an energy in the circular economy event on the 21st of July. There's the healthcare industry in Southeast Asia on the 22nd of July. And there's optimizing social media webinar on the 28th of July. So please do log in and register for those events if they are of interest. I'd also like to highlight the diversity and inclusion events. We will be holding more related to both this topic and others in our pillars of D&I going forward. So please sign up for those as you see them being advertised. But on that note, once again, thank you to all the panelists. Thank you to all the the members for registering and dialing in, and we'll close the call. Thank you very much.